Hey guys, Jen here. Welcome to discussion number 2. So I just discovered that my phone, I did not charge it last night, so it's actually not has that much battery left. So I'm going to try to charge it as I broadcast, and hopefully it will work. I don't know because I've never tried it. So let's see. Try to put that on. Well, we'll see what happens, I guess. All right, so welcome to the discussion. I'm Jennifer Blanchard. We are talking about, for anyone who's new, for anyone who's just getting started with us, following along, we are talking about this book. I know the image is backwards. I apologize. Unfortunately, I can't do anything about it because it has to do with the way Facebook has their live stream set up. So, Story Engineering, Larry Brooks. We're talking about this book. Today, we read part 3, which is all about character. So that's one of his 6 core competencies that he talks about. If you are following along, there is a reading guide that goes with this event. And if you haven't gotten it, you can go to jenniferblanchard.net/storyengineering and you will be able to download it. And there's links there for the schedule and everything else. Okay, so I've been trying to keep these live streams short, but unfortunately, some of these sections are just very, there's a lot of stuff in them. And so we just want to make sure we go through a lot of it and, talk about a lot of it. So character, I've pulled out several things that I think is really important to talk about when it comes to character. And I would love to just sort of hear, as a starting point, where you found the most value in looking at this character section for today. So what stood out to you? What was the most just like aha thing that you got from reading this section on character? I would love to know. And then I will tell you mine, obviously. So there's a comment box. If anyone wants to participate and actually comment, feel free to do that so that I'm not just talking to myself. Or feel free not to. Totally up to you. I'd rather take the time than it be short. Oh, okay, good. Well, and that's good because this one's definitely not going to be short. Tomorrow will be shorter because I assigned us a shorter section. So for tomorrow, we're reading part 4, which is on theme, but it's actually a lot shorter than the other sections that we've been reading. So we won't have as long of a discussion. But anyway, so I would love to just, like I said, to hear, your number one takeaway from this section or, what it is that you've learned from reading the section on character. Let's see. Lynn says, dimensions. I was trying to accomplish too much at once. Yes, that's a great one. That's actually a really good one. And that's something I'm going to talk about in a few minutes, actually. So when it comes to character, and again, there's so much, and I love talking about character because it's one of my most favorite just topics and something that I love, something I have a passion for because I write character-driven stories a lot of the times. So for me, character is like this just really fun, really important part of the whole story process. All right, so starting off, one of the things that Larry talked about in story engineering and in this section of the book, which I think is so interesting and something that is really fun to ask about. So Rita says, I feel I need to work on character arc. Yes, that is a good one. I've got a really great example for you for this, and we're going to get to character arc in a little bit. That's a big thing that I love to talk about is character arc. Sorry if the video imaging is looking a little bit strange, but I've got the light of my computer because my phone is charging, and then I've got this like crazy sunlight coming in from the other window. So sorry if it looks a little bit funky. But anyway, okay, so something that he talked about in the section that we just read was when people say, what's the definition of story? And they ask for one word to define story. So you've obviously read the section, so you know what his answer is, and I'm going to elaborate on it a little bit. But I would love to know, when you heard that question or when you thought of that question, what was the first thing that came to mind for you as far as what you define story as? So put that in the comments, your one word to define story. And feel free to use the one that he used if that is the word you're now adopting because it's obviously the right one. But I would just love to hear what you would think when you hear, what is a story. And then we got some other stuff. How to look at character arc by looking at human nature. Yes, that's awesome. That's a good one. Character is a wonderful thing, and as I see my main character change, it's so inspiring. Yes, absolutely. And that's the whole point of a story. I mean, the story doesn't become a story until we have a character that we want to actually care about and root for, and someone who we actually want to follow on this journey over the course of the next, 300 pages. So character is a super important part of story, and it's also an important part of figuring out your plot, which I don't think a lot of people talk about. And this is something that he talked a lot about in this section. And I think that it's really important because, again, a lot of times you'll have writers where they think character is story and they'll just run with it. And then what they end up with is an episodic narrative. So it's actually the day-to-day occurrences in a person's life, but we're not actually getting a story because there's no one who's opposing them. There's no one who's getting in their way or trying to stop them from doing something. There's just, oh yeah, there's conflict and there's drama maybe, but there's no core antagonist. There's no one driving the story and giving us stakes and things that we need to actually make the story interesting and engaging for a reader. All right, so Larry talks about the word that he uses for what defines story, and he says conflict, which I think so many people will say that, but he goes a step further, and then this is the distinction that changes everything. So he says conflict, meaning something that's opposing your protagonist, that's causing a conflict. So a lot of the times when writing teachers or when people who write, books about writing or teach about writing will say story is they will say, oh, it's conflict. And they won't go any deeper to explain it. And so what happens is that writers are misled to think that, conflict is the only thing that matters to make it a story. And so they will go, oh, well, my story has conflict. So that's when I see writers that have like episodic narratives where it's literally just the day-to-day occurrences in a character's life, a journey that they go through, but there's no one opposing them. And I say, well, this is an episodic narrative. And they'll tell me, well, no, because it has conflict. And conflict is story. So the distinction that's super important to take away is the opposition part, because without opposition, you don't have a story. You have an episodic narrative of a character's life, and that's it. So he defined that in here really, really well. I think it's something that no one talks about. People really glance over it because it's not something that we're really taught, I don't think. But opposition is story. Without opposition, there is no story. There's just an episodic narrative. There's a diary of a character's life, but there's no actual something that we want to root for a character to do, to, defeat somebody, to overcome something. And that's really the whole point of a story. That's why we read stories, is to see an ordinary person turn into a hero by overcoming something externally and internally, which now makes them heroic. So that is opposition, and that is what a story is. Oh yeah, we have Larry on today. Yay. He says conflict versus opposition. You make this point well. It's huge. Exactly. I mean, for me, I think that was the turning point of just my own story journey and realizing that, like, if I don't have opposition, I don't have a story. So now when I look at movies and books, it's easy to pick out, oh, okay, that's the opposition. And I'm going to be talking more about this in the coming weeks. I've got a whole video coming on this topic. So I'm excited to sort of dive into that later. But it's really important. So if you take nothing else away from this live stream today, take that away, because it is super, super important. Opposition is story. All right. So Larry mentions the 3 dimensions of character, and a couple of you talked about that in your comments as well. And rather than just focusing on that, because I think, again, there's just so much to talk about with characters, so I don't want to take 2 hours of your time today. So I'm going to go to what he talked about on page, and let me find the page. Oh, right on the first page. So page 54 of the section. And he talked about what he calls the 7 key characterization variables. And I think that those are so huge for, understanding how to create a character that's compelling, that's interesting, that, is someone that someone's going to root for, actually care about. It makes a huge difference. So going through these, and the 3 dimensions of character are built into this. So I feel like these 7 things can really give you a story plan and really be your development of a character. So, okay, you're going to take your protagonist, go through these 7 things, and when you've got them, you've built your character and you're ready to, move on to the next character. So I think this is just, and again, you don't have to do this for all your characters. The most important one is obviously a protagonist. It's always a good idea to do it for your antagonist as well. Other than that, it's up to you if you want to go this deep on your other characters. I always say it's good to know, as much as you can about them, but not necessarily things you're going to actually put in the story. And Larry talked about that too, as the Iceberg Principle. So, you knowing the backstory, knowing all the information, but only giving 10% of it in the actual story. And I don't know if we talked about that in this section or not, but because I've read this book so many times, I honestly can't remember, but I know that that's something he talks about. So, okay. So going through these 7 key characteristic or characterization variables. I call them characteristic variables, character variables, whatever you want to call them. The 7 things that you need to know about your characters. So the first is surface affections and personality. So this is what we see on the outside. This is, who they are as a person to everybody else. So they see them as, this character who likes certain things or acts a certain way or looks a certain way. And that's it. That's the surface level of all of that. And that is also one of the 3 dimensions is, the surface level traits that the character has. So the second characteristic is backstory. So this is going to be the stuff that actually explains why the character is the way they are, why they act the way they do, the things that have happened to them to get them to this point in their life. That's the whole idea with backstory. Now, something I see a lot with stories is that people will think, oh, the backstory is the story. And so like I'll read someone's, story and all of a sudden it's like the whole beginning of the story is just backstory of this character, but we're not actually in the story that's moving us forward in the present time. And even if it's like a story that's taking place not in the present time, you still want something happening now, not just giving us backstory of this character. So that's why I said it's important for you to know the backstory, but only 10% of it gets in the actual story. And that's the important thing. And Larry is making some good comments here. Let's see. The subsequent epiphanies along the way are an amazing experience. Yes, absolutely. That's, I think, the whole thing. And that's why I was saying yesterday about being a student of story and committing to being a lifelong student of story, because there's always something more to learn. There's always another level you can go to. And that's why, even though I've read this book so many times, I read it every single year because I really find that it helps me to understand this at a deeper level and to just really take it in more and for it to be intuitive now because I've really programmed myself to think this way about story. And that's really, a big part of it. So Julie, I find it really difficult to get the right balance between telling the reader too much and not enough. How can I address this, please? Well, I mean, I think, and Larry, please chime in on this one. I think it really comes down to what is happening in your story and what absolutely needs to be in there for it to make sense. So the whole thing with backstory is you don't want it to be in there just to give us characterization. Like, that's fine if you want to add it into a scene where there's something actually important to the story happening and moving the story forward. But the thing you want to be aware of is not just dumping in a bunch of backstory because you think, oh, the reader has to know all this stuff. Most of the time, the reader doesn't have to know as much as you think that they do. So when you're planning out your specific scenes, that's when I would think about, okay, what backstory needs to be here for this to make sense, or for this, to move the story forward in a way that actually ties into the rest of the story. So really thinking about the specifics of the scenes and not just like, okay, I have all this backstory, where am I going to put it? Don't do it that way. Do the scenes first and then look at, okay, what's happening in this scene and does any backstory need to come into play in order for it to be addressed or to, make sense. That's how I like to look at it. Let's see what Larry's saying. This is a story sense thing, the highest level of what we do. Stick with it. The degree of foreground relevance is key. Okay, yeah, exactly. So sort of the thing he's saying is story sense. It's about just knowing this stuff enough and practicing it enough that you sort of just have that sense of, okay, this is enough backstory, or this is too much backstory. The way you want to look for it is look for like info dumps. So basically, did I just dump a bunch of backstory in here, but it doesn't actually tie into anything? And look for places where that's happening. And like he says, scene mission is really helpful. Exactly. So knowing what the purpose of the scene is, and once you know that, then you can say, does the backstory need to come in here? Is it important in order to explain this or for it to move the story forward? And if not, then you don't give it to us. Now, something that I think a lot of writers get upset about is that, well, I've got all this backstory, or maybe they've written this draft a few times, so they feel like, well, what the hell am I going to do with all this stuff I've written that I'm attached to now that I really like? And so the thing I always recommend is use that stuff. Don't just get rid of it, but save that stuff, the stuff you don't end up using in the story. Save it to the side, put it somewhere in a folder or whatever, and then use it to create separate content that you can use to promote the book once it comes out. So you can use it as sort of like bonus content for your readers. So it could either be stuff you give them after they buy the book, or it could be stuff you use to promote the book. So maybe, sharing a little short story about a character, or, something like that. So it's like just little things you can do, maybe turning it into a blog post, or turning it into, some sort of a character sketch or something. People who read your book that enjoyed it will just want to learn more about those characters. And that would be a way to give that to them. And then not throw away all the stuff you've worked on that you actually enjoyed and that you like, but that doesn't really go in your story anymore. Larry says, backstory is the fodder of literary fiction and the risk of genre fiction. We need it. It helps, but too much is toxic. Absolutely. Absolutely. And you can always tell. I mean, I feel like you're used to reading stories that have been edited and had, a vetting process with the publishers and stuff. So they don't have that backstory info dump. But if you've ever read the story from like a new novelist or someone who's still working on their story, a lot of times you'll see those backstory dumps where it's like you start the story and then all of a sudden 3 pages goes by and we're getting all this history of the character, but it's not tying into this, what's actually happening in the story. Julie, thank you for the advice, Jen, and encouragement. Larry, wonderful to hear it from you in person. Excellent idea about using content to promote the book. We'll definitely take that up. This is amazing. Mark says, oops, I found my mistake, part 3 of the book. I don't know what you mean by that, but I'm glad you found whatever you were looking for. Okay, moving on again through the 7 key characters. I'm going to keep calling them characteristic variables. I don't know why. Characterization variables. Okay, the third is character arc, which I'm going to talk about more in a little bit because this is my favorite part. I love character arc. But basically, character arc is how a character changes from an ordinary hero or an ordinary person, an ordinary protagonist, into a hero by the end of the story. So it's the arc that they make over the course of the story, how they change, how they grow, getting through their inner demons especially, and then dealing with the external antagonist on the outside. So that's your character arc, and it's built into, it's not your core story, but it is how the core story unfolds, and it's the thing that helps the core story unfold and helps the character deal with everything over the course of the story. Okay, number 5 is, I skipped one. Number 4 is inner demons and conflict. So this is the inner struggle that a character has. It's that thing that's, causing them all the turmoil that they're having inside and potentially in their life because of the way they act and the things that they think. The idea with the inner demon, and this is super, super important, is that you don't want to just have an inner demon and nothing else. So I see a lot of stories where the inner demon is the only conflict or only antagonist that's going on in the story, and that's it. You don't want that. You have to have both an inner struggle and an outer struggle. So there has to be an external antagonist and there has to be an internal struggle or inner antagonist, if you want to call it that. I don't like to call it that because I feel like it confuses the two. So to me, an antagonist is external and internal is the inner demon. So it's that inner struggle the character has that they're going through that's causing them to have problems. And I've got a really, really good example, one of my favorites that I'm going to talk to you through in a few minutes about character arc. But moving on through this. So inner demons is a big part of character arc, obviously. So number 5 is worldview. So this is the character's beliefs or their belief system. It's the way they think, it's how they view the world, and it's their perspective on everything and how they think about things. So it's really important because if you know how a character believes and what they think and the things that they see to be true about the world or about life, that's going to give you a really good insight into how they're going to act and the way they're going to say things and what they would do in a story. So number 6 is the goals and motivation. So this is what's driving the character in the story. Now, the first thing to say about that is in the beginning of the story, your protagonist probably has a different goal than they have as the antagonist gets introduced later. The goal may be the same, but it may change. It depends on the story. So some stories, the goal stops and they actually start a new goal with, dealing with this antagonist, or sometimes the antagonist just raises the stakes on the goal that's already happening. So in a couple of examples of that. So let's say Happy Gilmore. So if you've seen that, it's an Adam Sandler movie, another 90s Adam Sandler movie. In that one, the beginning of the movie, his goal is to become a professional hockey player. Then the antagonist gets introduced and we find out that his grandmother's house is being repossessed. They're taking everything away from her and now they have to come up with like $270,000 to pay it back. So it changes his goal because now his goal isn't to be a professional hockey player. That's sort of put on hold, and his goal is to actually help his grandmother now get this money and save her house. So the goal changes. And then in some stories, and I'm trying to think of a quick example. So in the story that I wrote, so the one I published, and a lot of you probably haven't read it, but it's called Soundcheck. And in that one, her goal in the beginning of the story is to get a promotion to what she's considering her dream job. And the goal changes slightly at the first plot point when we're introduced to the antagonist, but the goal is still the same. It's just that the stakes have been raised on it. So now getting this thing has been taken to a whole new level. And that's the difference between the character goal and motivation. Let's see. Larry says, remember, relative to character, from our point of view as authors, the book is not precisely about the character. It is about what happens to the character. What happens becomes the window into seeing and understanding and most of all feeling empathy for the character. A huge but subtle career-making difference. Yes, totally. And I actually have some notes on that and a few as well. But that's something really important to address, and I maybe even just do it right now. The idea of just knowing that the only way you're going to have a character your readers are going to care about is if you build empathy into the picture. So doing something to make this character someone that the people can empathize with. And again, I'm going to talk about this in a few minutes as well, but I think that's, and he says it too, it's something that makes a big difference, because if no one's rooting for your character, that's it. No one cares. I recently worked with a story where literally the beginning of the story, so the first part of the story, was one story, and then we got to the first plot point, and it literally changed the whole story. One of the characters died right before the first plot point. So all of the things that I had fallen in love with about the story, the character that I was actually enjoying seeing the journey of, was killed off. And then we started a whole new story at the first plot point. And it was like, it made me not care about the journey anymore, because you killed off all the stuff I actually cared about and I built empathy about up to that point. So that's the idea of empathy. If you're going to build that up and get to a point where someone actually cares, you don't want to just drop that off. You want them to continue caring and build into, you know, the story, the stakes that need to be there in order for you to want to root for them. Okay, let's see. There's some more comments coming in. Let's see. Relative to my last comment, happens is loaded 3-dimensional word. Yes, that maybe explain that more, but yeah, exactly. It's what happens is relative to the story and what's happening in the story. Okay, and number 7 of the key characterizations is the decisions, actions, and behaviors. So this is the sum of all of it. So it's really the thing that causes everything. So now we know all the other 6 traits, and now we have this deeper level of this is how the character acts, this is how they behave, this is the actions that they take or don't take. So that all makes a big difference in the story, and it obviously gives identity to the character and decides this is what they would do or wouldn't do. And the reason I say these 7 things are the best way to develop your story, you know, your character for your story, is because they answer all the most important things. And then when you have these answers, you can actually know how the character's going to act, how they're going to react, what they're going to do or not do. And that will help you make decisions about what needs to happen in your scenes, how they're going to be executed, and, you know, what is actually going to happen in them. Larry says, happens to them, with them, at them, because of them, all leading to consequences. Yes, okay, that's good clarity. Thank you. Sean, thanks Jennifer and Larry via comments. The story is something that happens to the characters, something that they experience, and how it changes them or not changes them. I'm trying to move past the episodic character experiences and trying to build a plot for my characters to navigate. Awesome. That is perfect, because you definitely need to do that. And I think just getting that you are knowing that you have had episodic experiences is the first thing, because I think awareness is key to any of this. If you don't have awareness on the fact that you don't know what you're doing or you're not quite there yet, then it's impossible for you to understand what you have to change in order to get to that next level. So like for me, I spent 13 years of my life. So this is, you know, I started writing my very first novels and novellas and short stories when I was in middle school. So I was like 11, 12 years old. So 13 years went by before I realized that I had no friggin' clue what I was doing. So, you know, I just wrote stories by the seat of my pants. I loved it, had fun. But then when I got serious about actually wanting to publish and to be a professional novelist, I realized I had no idea what I was doing. And so it was a huge, huge epiphany for me when I found Larry and I learned about structure from him, you know, back in 2009, to realize that like this changes everything. Because now I have awareness of the fact that I'm missing something and that I don't know what I'm doing. And now I know what I need to learn in order to know what I'm doing. So for me, the awareness was super key. And so Sean, the fact that you even noticed that is amazing. And that's going to get you to the next level without a problem. All right. We sort of already talked about opposition, and like I said, I have a lot more coming on that in the coming weeks, so I won't dive too much on that. But going back to what really makes someone care about a character. So we were talking, what makes them care, it's empathy. They have to actually empathize with the person. They have to feel something for them. They don't have to like them. And that's the thing that Larry talked about in this section, which I thought was awesome and was a really, really good distinction from other writing teachers. Because I think a lot of the times we're taught that you have to create a likable character. And a lot of times that's what they say. Like I remember being in fiction workshops where the professor or the teacher would say, you got to create a likable character, which isn't really true. And Larry talked about that in here and really, I think, made a good point for they don't have to be likable. They just have to be somebody that you empathize with, someone that you're willing to root for because you care about them. So I would love to know, share in the comments, what makes you care about a character when you're reading a story? What is it about, their journey, or what specifically is happening to them? Is it because they're relatable to you? Is it because you, sort of feel bad for them, or you feel for their journey? Share in the comments what makes you care. And something, so I'm going to quote Larry in something that he said in this section, which I think just really, really describes it well. And that is, again, empathy causes you to want to root for somebody. And so he says, readers love a vulnerable hero who recognizes her own weaknesses and temptations, then conquers them in, oh God, I wrote this in my own handwriting, so I can't read it. Conquers them in the face of a higher calling. And I don't think that's exactly what he said, but I can't read my handwriting, sadly. Sorry, this is embarrassing. I have chicken scratch notes. Maybe you could see them. They're a little bit chicken scratchy. But anyway, the idea of readers love vulnerability. They love that they can connect with a character who sees that they have weaknesses, who understands that they aren't perfect, that there's something about them, and that they're willing to put them aside or overcome them in, the need to handle a higher calling, something bigger that's happening in the story that they have to put this aside for, give up their bullshit basically so that they can save the world or overcome the antagonist or, defeat the bad guy, whatever they have to do in the story. That's what it's all about. Let's see. Some of the stuff is coming in. What makes them care? Care about their story quest first and foremost. Rita says, the feeling that I've been there. Hope says, unfair injury. Joy, pet the dog moment can help. Awesome. Yeah, so that's what makes you care. So a really good example that I have, and it's funny that this character also happens to be named Mr. Brooks. But the movie Mr. Brooks, if you've ever seen with Kevin Costner, really, really amazing thriller, by the way. If you haven't seen it, highly, highly recommend it. But basically, Mr. Brooks is this serial killer. So he's a serial killer, and he's never been caught. So not only is he a serial killer, but he's really good at covering it up, and he's just really good at manipulating and lying and making stuff up and covering his tracks. So normally you would hate a character like that. Like normally you would hate him. Like you would normally think he's the worst person in the world. You wouldn't want to read a book about him or watch a movie about him. But what made him so compelling is that he feels bad about it. He feels guilty. He actually had a split personality. So he, who he really is this loving, caring, kind person who wants to be better. And then he has this dark side of him that makes him evil. And, it's this other character who talks, his sort of second personality that tells him what he should do and convinces him to do these killings and stuff. And what's interesting is that you feel for him because even though you can't relate to being a serial killer, most likely, I hope, but you can relate to his struggle of not wanting to do these bad things that he's doing. So we all have that. We all have bad habits or bad, things we've done that we would love to not do anymore, bad habits we have or whatever. Well, that is something we can relate to, even though his is on a whole other scale, obviously, but it's just that relatable quality of, well, you feel for the guy because he doesn't want to be doing this. He just can't help it. He can't control himself because he has this split personality going on. So I just thought that was such a cool way to see of you don't have to like the person. And really, you do like him. That's the funny part about this movie is that by the end, you really actually do like him. In the beginning, maybe not so much, but you feel for him. And that's the whole idea of creating a character that people want to root for, that they want to go on this journey with. So really good example. Definitely check that movie out if you get a chance. Mr. Brooks, not about Larry Brooks, but about another guy named Brooks. Really, really good story. I love it. Let's see. We got some other comments. Let's see. Larry says, Rita, even better, the feeling that you are there right with the character. Corey says, I like a character most when I believe in what the protagonist is doing or believe that they are doing something I respect. Janet says, I think Clint Eastwood is the epitome when it comes to creating an unlikable but highly empathetic character. The old man in Gran Torino and the boxing coach in $1 Million Baby. Both brilliant. I just didn't understand why until going through section 3. Oh, yes. Awesome. That's a really good point because I hated the ending of Gran Torino. Hated it. But he, was a very likable character. And same thing with $1 Million Baby. I didn't like the ending of that either, but I understood it and I empathized for the situation and for, the decision that he had to make. So that's a really good example. Janet, and everything Bruce Willis ever did. It's awesome. Dexter makes us question what specifically we are rooting for. Genius. Luke Skywalker, whiny brat, but what a quest. Absolutely. Exactly. So these are characters who maybe aren't super likable, or, you're not in love with them from the beginning, but they have a quality about them or something about them that makes you want to hang out with them, makes you want to empathize and follow their journey. Let's see. Sean says, Kevin Spacey plays beautifully flawed characters. Yes, totally. That's so true. So true. I was just, what the hell was I just watching the other day? Pay It Forward. That's a good one. Although I feel like his character was kind of likable in that one, but I could see how, some of his other stuff. Okay, so that's the whole thing with creating a character that you actually care about and want to root for. It's all about the empathy, and it's all about, just making sure that there's something there that the person's going to want to read the character, want to root for, and all of that. Larry says, notice how we're talking about characters, but with the context of the story quest the author has given them. We empathize for that first and foremost. Exactly. So I think the thing that really causes you to root for them even more is the introduction of the antagonist. So it's that thing to say, okay, there's this character that you like now and you are sort of on board with them. And then all of a sudden, boom, something happens. And now you feel for them even more because it's like, oh my God, how are they going to do this? Like, what are they going to do? Oh my gosh, what's going to happen? And you sort of just like all these questions start popping up. So you have to follow this journey. You have to stick with them, see what happens, see how it unfolds. So like with the Mr. Brooks example, the antagonist is this guy who catches him in the act, and then instead of turning him in, decides to ask him to let him be involved in one of the killings, or he will turn him in. So he sort of takes pictures of it and says, well, he's blackmailing him. You're going to let me be part of this with you, or I'm going to turn you in. So even though at this point we know as viewers of this movie that he deserves to be turned in and that he should get turned in, and there is a cop who's actually been, looking for him and trying to find him for all these years. Well, even though we know all of this, we're rooting for him to not get found out. Like, we're rooting for this guy to fail, to not stop him from, keeping this a secret. We actually are on board to watch him try to keep his secret, which is so crazy. But that's what, really good writing can do and really good storytelling, which is why I love Mr. Brooks as an example for, character arc and just watching a character unfold and the journey and all of that. So definitely check that one out. Okay, character arc. So this is, like I said, one of my favorite topics because I love the character thing. I write character-driven stories. For me, a lot of times the character is the first thing that comes to me, and then from there I develop the rest of the story. That's not true for every story, but it's definitely true for a lot of them. So I think character arc is super, super fun to talk about and just a really important part of the storytelling process. Let's see, Larry says, lit fiction asks us to be fascinated by a character. Commercial fiction asks us to be part of their story, the story quest against an antagonist with stakes that are empathetic and serious with consequences. Yeah, and I think that's the reason why I've always hated lit fiction, because I could never get into it. It just, to me, was so boring, just had no purpose, and I just could never get into it. I definitely don't know how people enjoy that, but maybe people just enjoy learning about new people and characters and stuff. I definitely love that you have a journey, that you have someone you want to follow and go on this journey with, and it obviously makes a story a million times better. So yeah, I mean, I'm totally on board with the commercial fiction way of writing, even if I self-publish and don't really care to do the mainstream fiction thing. To me, it's still super important that all of my stories are exactly like they would be if they were published professionally. So, I mean, well, they are published professionally, but they're published by me versus a publisher. That's what I mean. Okay, so character arc, like I said, is overcoming the inner demon over the course of the story and in the face of the antagonist. External, not internal. So the internal is part of the battle, but the external is the reason that they're willing to deal with that inner struggle. So, and that's another key distinction, I think, is a character is not going to deal with their own inner demons just on their own. Like, that's not a choice they're going to make. Maybe people in real life will do that, but this is a story. And in a story, a character is not going to do that. So you have to give them a reason to overcome that inner demon. And that reason is the antagonist, which is why you have to have both the inner struggle and the external struggle. Because when the external struggle happens, the character knows that they have to, they don't know right away, but they know eventually they have to overcome that inner demon. Because if they don't, they won't have what it takes to overcome the outer demon. And so that's why, it's absolutely key, important thing for them to do to have that. So that's why you got to have both inner struggle and outer struggle. It does not work to just have one or the other. Okay, Larry listed out inner demons on page 98. So if anyone, wants to sort of follow along, and I'm just going to read some of them because I think it's something that people don't really talk about a lot, and this is why I'm glad he talks about it, is the specifics of what the hell an inner demon actually is. So I think a lot of times it's like, oh, I know I have to have an inner struggle, but what is the inner struggle? And so then people will pick things that really isn't really what an inner demon is. So it's like, oh, well, his backstory, which his backstory could be an inner demon in some ways, but you want to give him something specific that he can really deal with, overcome. So like in some cases, like for example, Top Gun, his backstory is pretty much his inner demon. It's that thing that's sort of getting in his way. But I don't know. I like stories better when they have a more specific like thing. So as example, so what Larry listed in story engineering is cowardice, selfishness, addiction, fear, conceit, arrogance, hatred, resentment, bias, lack of confidence, stupidity, genius, heritage, poverty, ignorance, sociopathic insensitivity, being naive, spotty moral compass, sexual deviance. In general, any aspect of humanity that isn't in line with the expectations of others or accepted ground rules of success within the boundaries of your story and the rules you created for it. So that, like I always like to say it as anything that society would consider bad, that's an inner demon. So anything that society would say, oh, you shouldn't be like that. You shouldn't be a control freak. You shouldn't be a perfectionist. You shouldn't be whatever. Those are things that count as inner demons. Let's see. Larry says, too often commercial writers try to write from a lit perspective. Yeah, that's bad news. Joy, yes. Thank you for being specific about inner demons. Rhiannon, I always struggle with getting the inner demons right. Well, I mean, again, it's more of a story sense thing. Like I think Larry was saying, it's really more about, okay, who is this character? What is the journey in the story? Something I like to do as just an example and sort of a practice is thinking about the external antagonist and then saying, what inner demon would this antagonist really, really play up and really bring out in the story? So as an example, the novel that I wrote, that I published, Soundcheck, in that one, her inner demon is that she's a control freak. So she tries to control everything, and that's, obviously considered a bad thing in society. So she's a control freak, and the external antagonist causes her to have an ultimatum where she no longer has control of anything. The control has been completely taken away from her. It's completely out of her hands at this point, and she can't do anything about it. So that really plays up her inner struggle of being a control freak, because when you're a control freak and you can't control anything that's happening around you, that's going to create chaos. It's going to create conflict. It's going to cause stakes. It's going to do a lot of damage. So for me, that was the perfect, inner struggle. And I didn't even have the inner struggle until I had the external conflict. And then I thought, okay, well, what plays really well with this? And then I thought, well, perfectionism, control freak, being not good enough. And then I picked control freak because I just thought that would work really well in the way I was trying to tell the story. So that's how I used it in my story. And like I said, I have an example for you that I'm going to read through in a second, but I want to just go through the context of character first, because then this will make more sense. Okay, so with the character arc, and character arc ties into plot. Obviously, it's a part of it because the character changing is really changing along with the story structure that's happening in the actual story. So you get the divisions of the story based on that. So there are 4 parts of a story. Part 1 is setup, part 2 is reaction, part 3 is attack, and part 4 is resolution. And within those 4 contexts of the story, your character has a context to play in each of those sections. And that's how the character arc unfolds. So in those 4 sections, character arc, starting with 1. So if part 1 is setup, the character is an orphan. So what that means, and like I said, Larry talked about this in the book, what it means is that the character hasn't been adopted by a story. So the antagonist hasn't come in yet. We don't know what the core story is going to be yet. We're just getting to know this person, and we're learning about their journey and where they're at currently, their journey in their life currently, where they're at. There's no official launching of a core story yet. So they're an orphan because they haven't been adopted by a journey. So then there's 2, which is the wanderer. Now this is when we've hit the first plot point. So the first plot point is the thing that separates part 1 from part 2. And we're going to get into structure over the next couple of days. But I just to sort of explain it, because otherwise character arc doesn't make sense. So first plot point changes the character from being an orphan to now they've been adopted by a story. And now they're in part 2, which is wanderer. So they're wandering around. They're trying to figure out what the hell they're going to do now that they've got this antagonist to deal with, what they're going to do, how they're going to move forward from here. And maybe they're not even moving forward. They're just sort of sitting there. So this is the wanderer. That's, I would say, and Larry, please correct me here, but I would say that part 2 is probably where we see the inner demons the strongest. Maybe we see them a lot in part 1 as well. But for me and the stuff I've been reading and studying and watching movies, like I see that part 2, the inner demons are the strongest a lot of the times because they're sort of in this wandering phase. They don't know how they're going to handle what's going on. And the inner demon's been sort of triggered by this antagonist. And so they're sort of just flailing around, not sure what they're doing. And so I think that the inner demons are most present during that part of the story. Okay, and then we've got part 3. So part 3 is attack. This is when the character is ready to actually take action. And so they become the warrior. So what separates that is the midpoint. So it's halfway through the story. We get something that happens, and that causes the character to transition from they're wandering around, they're reacting, they're not sure what to do, so they're finally sure what they're going to do. They're at least going to start taking some action that's going to get them somewhere. They're ready to take action and to be the warrior. And then we've got part 4, which is the resolution of the story, and also it's when the character becomes the martyr. So this is when they're ready to do whatever it takes, no matter what it takes, even if they have to die. Now, of course, we know they don't normally die, but it can happen, and in the example I'm going to show you, they do actually die. So, but this is them being heroic. This is them saying, I will do anything, whatever it takes. Now, I would say this is when the inner demons are the weakest because they're more willing to overcome them. They've gotten to a point where they know enough that they can actually make it happen, and more than they could the rest of the story. So that's character arc. That's how it unfolds over the course of a story, and it's struggling with the inner demon that causes all of this to happen. So let's see what Larry's saying here. Context may be tied for first place as the most important word in fiction, tied with conflict. Yep, they're winning in part 2. Hero may not even realize what is driving them in that quartile. Okay, yeah, so that's when the inner demons are winning. So they're taking over and they're not even sure what's happening. And then Larry says, now that you hear this, watch a film tonight, watch it unfold exactly this way every time. Yeah. The funniest thing is that when I first met Larry in 2009 online, I didn't meet him in person till last year actually, but I met him online and learned about structure from him. And he said to me one day in an email, there will come a point if you keep doing this where the structure will just jump off the screen at you. And I laughed because I was watching movies and going, I have no freaking clue what's happening. I have no idea what the plot points are. And so I was like, this is never going to happen, right? But 5-6 years down the road, all of a sudden the plot points started jumping off the screen at me, just like he said it would. And so I think that's another reason why it's so important to watch movies and study the stories, because you can see it happening in real time every single time. And that helps you to understand better how it works and how to use it in your own story. So now when I watch movies, I'm like, first plot point, first plot point, first plot point. Like I know, I don't even have to question it anymore. It's cool. I mean, but it takes a lot of studying and practicing and learning. So that's why I definitely recommend as much story studying as you can. Commit to being a lifelong student of story. Study it as much as you can. Watch a lot of movies. Read a lot of books. And just see how it's done. Let's see. Larry says, there are exceptions to character arc. Famous, serious characters rarely change. Sherlock Holmes, Batman, Reacher, etc. This is your story sense bubbling to the surface. Yes, it is. Finally, it is here, my story sense. Took me a lot of years to get here, but now that I'm here, I know that every story I write is going to be a million times better because of it. Yeah, I think the other thing with the exceptions to character arc, I think sometimes they don't change necessarily. I think a lot of times they overcome that same inner demon every story. So it just sort of becomes, I don't know, like a common thing. Maybe this is just from a series that I've read. Like one of the ones that I love is the Shopaholic series. So I'm sorry, I like girl books. But in that one, her inner demon is that she spends too much money. She can't handle her money. She can't handle her financials. She just is an overspender. So for her, and then, of course, there's all these other symptoms of the overspending. Like she lies about it, she tries to hide it and all these things. But basically, that's her core inner demon in every story. So in every story, her overspending gets her in trouble, but then she always finds a way to overcome it. So I feel like for that series, like the inner demon is the same each time. And then it's just how she overcomes it is different. Let's see. Hope says, the same thing happened to me after I read Larry's book. I can never look at movies the same way anymore. I know. It's fun, I feel like. At the same time, it can be frustrating because it's like you just want to enjoy and get into the movie, and the whole time you're going, oh, that's the first plot point. Oh, what's the motivation here? What's happening? And sometimes you just like don't want to do that. You just want to watch the movie, but you can't anymore. So, but believe me, it's better that way. It is better that way. All right, let's see. I have 3 POVs in my story: hero, sidekick, and antagonist. I would like to give my sidekick a character arc as well. Does the secondary arc get as much attention as the hero's arc? Larry, please chime in on this one. I would say no. I mean, I would say you can have a character arc. You don't have to. If you want one, that's cool. But I wouldn't say that it has as much attention because, again, this isn't about the secondary character. Secondary characters are supporting players to your main characters, and that's it. So, they can have arc, they can change, but I definitely wouldn't say that the focus is on that as much as it is on how the main character is changing. Let's see. I never thought about those characters. They're some of my favorites. Let's see. Larry, I'd say no, Janet, but you have to make that call. Story sense, again, always challenges us and eventually guides us. Price we pay, we analyze and should analyze everything we see and read. It's affirming, especially at first. Yeah. I mean, I think for me, when the plot points started jumping out at me and I just really started accepting that this is how stories work, it changed everything. Not only with my own writing, but just my own ability to watch a story and to see how well it was done. And that's why, like, now I have so much more respect for movie writers, and not that I didn't before, but I do now because I understand what they understand, and I know what goes into making a story cohesive and making it work. And it blows my mind that so many people have been able to do it so well. So I think that because of how complicated it is, and they make it look simple, and that's what is amazing about it. Okay, so character arc. Now that I've gone through this context, I am going to give you my favorite character arc example, which is from the movie Cruel Intentions. So if you've maybe seen the old version of this, Dangerous Liaisons, similar thing here, but I'm talking specifically about Cruel Intentions. So in that one, the main character, Sebastian Valmont, he is a great character to study because he does the character arc journey from ordinary guy to hero so well. Really, really well, and in a way that, is really different than what you would expect him to do. So in this story, his inner demon is that he's a liar and a manipulator. So those are his two things that he does with everything. He manipulates everybody. He lies about everything to get what he wants, get his way, especially with women. That's the biggest thing in the story, is that he's a ladies' man and, he's a good-looking guy or whatever. So he, just has all this stuff going on. And in the beginning of the story, he's extremely manipulative of the people around him. He's always playing mind games with them. He's telling lies to help control people, and people believe him. And that's the funny part. He, at the time, so this is sort of a worldview type of a thing, he believes that love is a game, and he messes with women for the fun of it. So he thinks that it's like a joke, like it's fun to just ruin people's lives. He doesn't care. In the beginning of the story, we actually see him having slept with his therapist's daughter and totally put pictures on the internet and just ruin her life. And then, of course, the therapist is an author whose book is coming out, and it's about parenting. So now he's just ruined that too, because her daughter is on the internet with, naked photos. That's not exactly good parenting. And so he kind of just ruined the book for the therapist as well. So this is the person that he is. He's not very likable at all. And I think the only redeeming quality is that you can just tell that there's something else there. And I think it's maybe the acting a little bit, and it's also the writing, but you can just tell that there's something more to this guy, and he's interesting and he's compelling, even though he's not that likable. So then we get, obviously our first plot point. We find out about the bet he's made with his stepsister. So they've bet that he can't sleep with the headmaster's daughter before school starts in the fall. So I think they're, a couple of months out from school starting. And that's the bet that he makes. So that's what starts our story journey. So now he's in part 2 of the story, where he's wandering around trying to figure out what to do next. So he starts off doing his usual stuff. He's going after this girl, the headmaster's daughter. He's going after her. He's doing his usual stuff because he doesn't see this, challenge as anything other than what he's already done in the past. To him, it's easy. It's not a problem. So he, Rita, you missed the name of the movie, Cruel Intentions. Okay, so in this part, again, he's doing his usual thing. So he's manipulating, he's lying, he's trying to do what he needs to do to convince this girl to sleep with him, obviously. And he becomes, and I'm reading off my little thing that I've written here, but he becomes even more so this way because, and again, this is like we were saying in part 2, the inner demons are probably the strongest because this is when they're really, really taking over and really controlling the character, where that's not happening as much in the rest of the story. So in this part, he knows that if he's intending to win this bet and to sleep with Annette, that he's going to have to go stoop to a level that he has never stooped to before. So he's doing things like charity work and pretending to actually care about, old people so that he can convince her that he's a good guy so that she'll sleep with him. And he's doing all these things. He's laughing. Like, he doesn't laugh. He's sort of a very serious person. He wears black the whole movie. I mean, his color choices are very dark and dreary. So he's stooping to a whole new low at this point. These inner demons are really taking over and really trying to stop him from, doing what he wants to do, which is get this girl. This girl is, she's pure, she's innocent, she wears white a lot in the movie, so I feel like it's sort of a play on the whole good and evil thing. But she just is totally different than all the other girls he's ever gone for, because she doesn't buy into his bullshit like all the other women did. So now he sees this isn't going to work. He's getting to a point where he's realizing that this isn't going to work. He's going to have to go deeper. He's going to have to do something he really has never done before. So now we go into part 3 of the movie. So, and again, I don't remember all the plot points because I just off the top of my head, but something happens in the middle of the story that changes things for him. So he falls in love with this girl. That's basically what happens. Is I don't remember the specific moment, but he basically falls in love with this girl. So he's digging deeper in part 3. He's becoming, a warrior. So he's really making changes. He's trying different things, but he's realized that he's in love with this girl that he's trying to sleep with. So he's fallen in love with her. That has never happened to him before. He's never loved anybody other than his stepsister. They have like a weird thing going on. But other than that, and that wasn't even real love, it was more manipulation on her part. He actually is in love with this girl. So he's starting to lose it. I mean, he's letting loose a little bit. He's showing the real him. He's acting in ways we haven't seen him act before. He's telling the truth about stuff. Like, it's very strange because that's not who he has been up until this point. So until the run-in with the antagonist causes him to go back to his old ways and then ruin everything. So that's sort of the play of, part 3, you're able to start taking action on the antagonist and on the inner demons, but don't think that they're going to give up, because they're not. They're just going to get stronger as the character gets stronger. So now the antagonist comes back in with another, problem or another thing that she causes for him and ruins everything. So now she's basically manipulated him into thinking that this girl, so he does sleep with the girl. That's the whole thing. He does sleep with her, but at that point, he actually is in love with her. So it's more than just he won this bet, he did the challenge, but he actually cares about her and he actually loves her and wants to be with her. But now the stepsister doesn't like that. The stepsister wants him back because she has to have control over him, has to manipulate him, because that's the only way she knows how to function. So she comes in, she manipulates him into thinking that he doesn't really love this girl, that he's ruining her life, that he needs to leave her alone, go away, and come back to her. So, of course, he buys into the inner demon again. He goes back, he listens to the sister, and he breaks up with the girl. So then, of course, we're into part 4 now. So this is when he's going to become the martyr. He's devastated over hurting her. After all this happens, after he does what he does, and he finds out that, it's over. He tells her it's over. He's done with her. Well, now he's in part 4 and he realizes he hurt her and he actually cares. Like, he never cared before. And the whole time he's breaking up with her, that he is feeling something different than what's coming out of his mouth, because even though he's saying he doesn't love her, he doesn't care about her, it was just a game, he's crying. Like, he doesn't cry. This is not a character who cries. So he's crying. He's very upset. And you can tell that he's making it up. You can tell that the lying is actually happening still, but it's in a totally different way. Because now he's lying about something that he actually is not. He's trying to say he doesn't feel something that he actually is feeling. So it's turned its head on him. And so now he's realizing that he's got to examine his old ways. So he starts looking at what he's done in the past. He starts going back through his journal, seeing all the people that he hurt. And he makes the decision to give the journal to this girl as a way to say, this is who I used to be. I want you to know all about it. And I'm willing to change for you because I love you. And that was the whole thing. So he overcame who he used to be. And he wanted her to know the truth about it, wanted her to know everything there was to know about him so she could know that he's now going to be a different person from this point forward. That's the whole, he's the martyr now. So he's willing to do whatever it takes. He gave up the old ways. He gave her the journal, all that stuff. And then at the end of the story, the girl, she obviously forgives him. She goes to try to find him. And he is, walking around just sort of aimlessly trying to figure out what to do now. And the sister has manipulated somebody else in the, side, because she's the antagonist, into thinking something was true that wasn't true. So this guy comes and starts attacking Sebastian. They get into a huge fight. And the girl comes down, Annette, she comes down and she sees this happening. And she runs over and tries to stop the fight from happening. So she pushes Sebastian, or she pushes the guy off of Sebastian, and she ends up falling and rolling into the road. And there's a car coming. So he immediately sees this, just without even thinking, lunges at her, pushes her out of the way, and gets hit by the car. And then, of course, he dies. So this is the reason I love this, is a really great example of character arc, because it shows how an ordinary person can become a hero. So he goes from this evil, manipulative, lying, just trying to control everybody guy to someone who actually had feelings, who cared about somebody, who was willing to give up his life and risk everything to save her from, the car, from everything. So overcoming the inner demon, overcoming the antagonist, nothing stopped him from saving that girl, from showing how much he loved her. And of course, right before he dies, the last thing he says is that I love you, Annette. So it's like the perfect ending to his character arc. Love this story. Love this movie. It's great. It's a fun watch. It's quick, and it's on Netflix right now, so you can totally watch it anytime. But that's character arc, and that's how it works in a story. That's how it unfolds, and that's how a character goes from ordinary to hero. And in this case, actually died, became the martyr, and gave up his life to save the girl that he loved and to defeat the antagonist, because now the antagonist has no control over him. And then the even fun part is that at the very end, we find out that the journal, actually, the girl published the journal, and then all the secrets from the sister have come out. So now the sister got turned in and loses everything as well. So it's perfect ending, defeats the antagonist and saves the day. Total character arc. Love it. So there was a bunch of comments while I was explaining that, and I'm sorry, I just didn't want to stop. So let's see. Larry says, Jen is demonstrating something really powerful here. When you get the principle of 4-part storytelling, each with different unique contexts, and with a character quest and arc in mind, you can tell a whole and compelling story in 4 to 8 sentences. That's the goal. When you can do that and do it well, you're ready to write it well. What she's doing is the outcome of solid story planning, however you get there. If you can't describe your story this well, you can't really expect to write it well. Trouble happens when writers try to believe they can write it without before knowing it this well. It's okay to write drafts, but keep in mind the difference between searching for a story defined at this level and believing you've got it already when you don't. Rita says, oh no. I hope that was oh no to the to what was happening in that story. Okay, sorry, I'm looking at these names. Joy says, have a protagonist that starts out weak who becomes strong is one of the basic arcs. In my story, I have a protagonist that is physically strong, so strong that she goes out for the football team. She is experiencing abuse from home, from alcoholic mom. But if you're starting out with a strong protagonist, what can be a strong character arc? Okay, well, I mean, and Larry, please chime in on this one too. I would say with a character arc, the whole thing is, it's not about whether they're strong or weak. It's about whether they have an inner demon that's stopping them from doing something, and whether they have a goal in the story that's stopping them from, getting somewhere that they want to go. And just let me get some water for a second. So I'm getting all passionate and excited now, and I'm starting to get, I need some water. So anyway, I would say it's not about the character being strong or weak necessarily, because I would say in the Sebastian case, the example I was just giving, he wasn't necessarily a weak character. He was a really strong character, and a strong-willed character, and someone who believed in what he was doing, even though it was evil, but he believed in it. So it's not that he was strong or weak. It was just that he had a weakness in him that he had to overcome. So think about what you can bring to that character that would make them have, an internal weakness of some kind, even if they are strong in general. Let's see. Larry says, I skipped one. Lynn says, I want someone to talk about my story with this passion and clarity. Great example of character arc. Well, there are story coaches out there who can do that. I know a couple of them as well as myself. So if you want to talk, just Jennifer at jenniferblanchard.net. Larry says, all of these craft tools give us the path, targets, and criteria for getting to that point. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, to me, character arc is a big part of plot, which is why I always recommend working on your plot and your character development at the same time, because I think you can't really have one without the other. You can't develop a plot and then try to fit a character in. You sort of have to have both, because the character and the arc that they're going to take in the story, their goal, the inner demon that they're going to overcome, it all ties together. So that's why I like to develop both of those things together. Corey says, most strong characters have been hurt from being too strong at some point. Yes. Larry says, to Joy, so many ways to grow other than physical strength. Let's see. Lynn, read Larry's 4 to 8 sentence comment. Is this the whole story or 4 parts? I think what he's referring to is being able to tell the whole story in 4 to 8 sentences, but Larry, maybe you can clarify on that one. All right. So that is everything that I had prepared to talk about today. Like I said, this section was pretty big, pretty just a lot of stuff in it, comprehensive. So some other stuff that I didn't talk about in this video, but I think is important to just mention is the human nature of character, which is, resentment, super important driving force in a character. And the other thing is backstory. So Larry talks a lot about developing backstory and how to, do that properly. So definitely go back and read part 3 if you haven't already, and just really study it, learn about the characters, the different stuff, because it will make the difference between a really kick-ass story and one that just falls flat, or an episodic narrative about a character's life because there's no arc and there's no journey and there's no antagonism/opposition. So for tomorrow, we are reading part 4, which is on theme. It's a shorter section. Like I said, I'm trying to sort of break these apart so we're not doing live streams for an hour plus every single day. So tomorrow is for theme. It's pretty short, so it shouldn't take that long for you to read it. I'm looking forward to having our discussion about it as well. If anyone has any final comments or thoughts, put them in the comments now, because I'm going to wrap this up. Let's see, we got some more coming through. Joy says, subplot and subtext. I thought I understood these things, but Larry takes it to a deeper level, love. But now I'm having understanding what they are and how to identify them. I'm assuming you mean you're having a hard time understanding what they are and how to identify them. Can you please go into this? Subplot and subtext. I think Larry would probably be the best person on this one. As far as subplot goes, and this is something that, this is just from what I've learned about stuff, subplot is usually not just random. So a subplot is something that has to do with the main character, your protagonist. It's just showing us another side of that person. So as an example, in the Mr. Brooks movie, we see the main story is him dealing with the fact that he is a serial killer and this guy is blackmailing him. That's the core story. But then we see these little subplots of him. We see the relationship he has with his daughter. And we see the, work ethic that he has and this company that he's built and how successful it's been. And so we're sort of seeing these other dimensions of this guy through the subplots that are happening around him. So I always think that the subplot should relate to the main character and sort of show us another side of them that just builds into the story, why we care, why we're following along the whole time, and, why it's important to us. Let's see. Lynn, wow, so much to think about. Thank you. You are welcome. Larry says, Lynn, the whole story has those 4 parts. They cover the whole thing: setup, response, attack, resolution. There is nothing beyond the resolution except perhaps a sequel. Okay, Sean says, Larry's 4 to 8 sentence comment is going on a note card above my computer. Thank you for doing this, Jennifer and Larry. Oh yeah, that you are welcome, and that is awesome. Hope, thank you, love the session. You are welcome. Corey, is it true that some stories develop the character arc naturally? As you write, the internal struggle can be an obvious choice, or is the obvious choice too predictable and not shooting high enough? Again, Larry may want to comment on that one. But I would say sometimes it is the obvious choice, and I don't think that's a bad thing. So like in my case of the story that I wrote, that I published, the inner struggle for me, the best fit was that she was a control freak, because what I was giving her in the face of the antagonist is a brand new project, a brand new journey she has to go on that she knows nothing about, that she has no information about. She's never done it before, has no idea why they would even make her do it in the first place. So for me, it just felt like a natural progression for her to be a control freak, because if you're taking all her control away, well, that really only works if she has the inner demon of control freak. Because, it would work with perfectionism. It would work with being not good enough. But it would be stronger with the whole control freak thing, because that's like taking all her control away. That's like saying, well, now you have no control and you're a control freak. What are you going to do about it? So, for me, that was kind of obvious. But, at the same time, I feel like it made the story. And it was really that thing that helped me to create this character arc that works in my story. So that'd be my take on it, and I'm sure Larry will have something to say as well. Larry says, what's obvious to the author is probably not obvious to the reader. It's new to them as they read. Probably more an evolution thing for you as you wrote it. Trust your story sense here. Perfect. Awesome. Thank you for that. Larry says, Joy, hang in there. A can of worms. We'll cover it more during the structure. Subplot is another arc paralleling the core dramatic arc, or at least an other facet of it. Often subplot is a love story unfolding along with a quest-driven story. Yes. Yeah, exactly. I think there are romance stories, and I will say in the romance world, they have very specific terms of how they talk about their stuff. They have very specific beliefs about how the story is supposed to work, how the characters are supposed to unfold, what the plot points are. It's completely different than what Larry talks about. Now, I wouldn't say it's completely different as far as it's very similar, but they have a very specific way of talking about it for romance-specific novels. If you're looking for something about that, check out Romancing the Beat. Really good book about how to use romance. I am more of a fan of like what Larry was describing, so the love story where it's a story and then there's a love story happening as sort of the subplot. So even in the Cruel Intentions thing, the love story was a subplot because the core story was his bet with his stepsister that he was going to be able to sleep with this girl. So even though the girl and the love story are the same person, the love story was a subplot because it wasn't the main part. He wasn't trying to fall in love with this girl. That's just what happened as a cause of it. So, that's definitely something to think about. All right, guys. Well, we've been on here for a while, so I'm going to wrap this up. And like I said, tomorrow we are reading part 4, so we'll be back at 1 p.m. Eastern to talk about part 4, which is all about theme. That one will probably be a shorter discussion because it's a shorter section of the book, but still most important as well because it is a core competency. So thank you for joining me. Thank you, Larry, for being on this thread. It's awesome to have you here and to just have you be part of this event with me. So really, really cool. If anyone has questions, again, put them in the comments because I will come back and check them after this. If you're watching on the replay and you want to have, put comments, don't worry about it. Well, I'll be back to check them later. And you can always hit me up in my Facebook group, the 1% Writers Club. It's totally free. And if you find me in there, I can answer your questions as well. Larry says, thanks everyone. See you Friday. I'm flying across the country tomorrow. Have a safe flight, Larry. And we look forward to having you back on the thread with us. Oh, and again, as a reminder, Larry and I are doing a live call. It is totally free, Monday night, 7 p.m. Eastern, January 9th. I will send out information and post information about it. But just to sort of give you a heads up, mark it on your calendar because we are going to be chatting with Larry live. Thank you, everybody. And I will catch you tomorrow. Bye.